Hello again. For some years now, one of the highlights of the run up to Christmas for some people seems to be to look out for the Christmas adverts on the telly from the big department stores and supermarkets. I imagine more and more money has gone into them as this little tradition has developed. And so, whatever you think of all this advertising, for what it's worth, my view is that it's not always easy to draw a neat dividing line between advertising, art, and graffiti. Whatever you think of all this advertising, there's no denying it has an impact, and it can be quite artful, quite moving sometimes. I remember a couple of years ago, John Lewis did an advert about a small boy getting a piano, and the small boy turned out to be Elton John. All very lovely, and large oaks grow from small acorns and so on. But I remember being a bit confused by the advert. Firstly, John Lewis didn't sell pianos, although they started pretty smartly after putting out the advert. But secondly, I was sure that the notes I saw the small boy playing on the piano in the advert weren't the notes which you could hear in the soundtrack. I thought he was playing a different interval on the keyboard. So I looked more closely, and when I looked more carefully and paused the video on the advert, I realised I'd been wrong. The angle of the camera was such that it disguised the interval. I'd thought the little boy's fingers were playing E, then G, an interval of a minor third. But I'd heard a fourth. It turned out, after all, that he was playing E and A, which is a fourth, so all was well. Until I thought to check on my own non-John Lewis piano and discovered the notes which sounded were actually B flat and E flat, which, for the benefit of those of you who are not used to musical terminology, is the right interval between the two notes, but as wrong as it's possible to get in terms of their pitch. I've never really been one for getting carried away with the Christmas adverts. But this year we've ended up watching a few things on various channels, catch-up services, and so I've had a few Christmas adverts inflicted on me again. And one in particular, which caught my attention, was the Tesco one. In case you've not seen it, it has a number of people confessing to quite minor and sometimes amusing misdemeanours, such as not teaching all the subjects to children when schools were closed, or not singing Happy Birthday while washing your hands. And the whole tone of the advert is to say it's okay to treat yourself, so buy stuff at Tesco. But it's framed in an interesting way. These are quotes from the advert. Relax. After this year, Tesco says there is no naughty list. Guys, it's fine. There's no naughty list, so tuck in. Britain, you have all the treats you want, okay? Because this year at Tesco, there is no naughty list. Now, if you heard me waffling on about advent calendars the other week, you'll know that I'm actually quite sympathetic to the idea that after this year especially, being kind to yourself and allowing some treats is not necessarily the worst idea in the world. But Tesco says there is no naughty list. So my first reaction was, who are Tesco to be able to pronounce judgment on this? Of course, Tesco's only real interest is in profit. They only really care whether there's a naughty list insofar as it can make them a profit or not. In that, I suppose, Tesco's are no different to most massive retailers. But the next thing which came into my mind was the whole concept of a naughty list. This is, of course, the Santa Claus mythology of Christmas. Now, at this point, I'm glad that I'm not a particularly high-profile person, because at this time of year, it generally appears that the newspapers are usually on the lookout for members of the clergy who say misunderstandable things about Santa Claus and therefore apparently ruin Christmas. I do not wish to be in the papers. But we all know that it's Santa who's going to find out who's naughty or nice, given that he is, apparently, according to well-placed sources, coming to town. In this mythology, Santa has a list of those who've been naughty this year and a list of those who've been nice. And those who've been nice get presents, and those who've been naughty, well, maybe not. The characters in the Tesco ad are worried that they've done something which counts as naughty and would therefore disqualify them from taking part in Christmas festivities. And the shame of that runs deep. We assume that if we've been naughty, then we don't deserve good things, or even that we deserve punishment. And the idea of what counts as naughty, once you're beyond primary school, has become, shall we say, a bit frivolous. It's not a word that gets used of major crime or oppression or exploitation. We in the church have not always found it easy to keep these things subtle. Santa's nice list, on the surface of it, doesn't seem all that far from the Lamb's Book of Life in the Book of Revelation. And so we worry, along with the characters in the Tesco ad, whether we're on the naughty list. But I wonder whether we sometimes too easily think of God as if God was Santa, withholding treats, or actively punishing those who are on the naughty list. And we're never quite sure whether we're on that list. And so we start thinking we don't deserve good things. But God is not Santa. God is not, as I said a couple of weeks ago, the big old straw man in the sky. Of course, there are things which we as humans can do which are wrong and which have consequences if we do them. They're generally about treating other humans as if they were not children of God, as if they were not in God's image, as if they were not invited to God's table. But worrying about whether we are on the naughty list, and whether that means we're undeserving of good things, is shading more to the Santa mythology rather than God. God is about grace, which is not about deserving. Deserving doesn't come into it. God does not love you because you deserve it. Love has nothing to do with deserving. So please, don't ever think you don't deserve God's good things. God is not Santa. I've now got this horrible feeling that the phrase, "because you're worth it," is going to launch itself from the back of my mind and out of my mouth. I should really stop watching the adverts. God bless. See you soon.